So, hi everyone, and welcome to Wait, Hold Up, What? In this episode, this is actually part of a series. And, I've been talking to a lot of my girlfriends lately, and we've been talking about content for Eliminate Girl Hate and like what is at the cornerstone of all of that. And a lot of it is about money, right? We're in this time in which so much is happening and it's hard to know prices are raising. Are we going into a recession? Are we not going into a recession? People are losing their jobs. What does that mean for them? All of a sudden, I started talking really fast because it's just all a lot, right? And it's coming at us really fast. And so I wanted to do a series about women and money. And so what we will do is I actually think this will be the second episode in the series because I'm going to do one about the economy of women. So if you haven't, or yeah, the economy of gender, if you will. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, listen to that and it'll give you a really nice foundational element for what we will talk about today. And then my guest today is going to come back and we're going to talk about a few other things. And then we're also going to talk about pay transparency and how that works in helping to advance the cause for equal pay and gender parity in the workplace. So we've got a lot of really cool episodes coming. But today we're going to talk to my new friend, Gina Jacobson. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so Gina is a financial planner, wealth management planner, however you want to kind of uh, refer to it as yourself. I like saying wealth manager because it makes me feel like I got some wealth going on, even if I don't, or that we're headed in that direction. So we're manifesting wealth. And what I think is really cool about your bio is you work for Vision Capital Management, and it is a woman founded wealth management firm right here in my own backyard in Portland, Oregon. And that is kind of rare, is it not?
It's very, very rare. This is a very male dominated industry, about 70% male, and it's been that way for decades. So it's cool. Vision Capital was founded in 1999 by a mother and daughter. So
Wow.
25 years, they've been serving the Portland community, and it's just really an amazing testament to the power of women and the unique way that women um, can foster and build relationships.
I love that so much because I think that oftentimes it's so funny because sometimes I'll speak and I speak in this generalities and then I get all like verklempt because I shouldn't do that. But I do think that there is a history of women and money that is uneasy. We're not supposed to talk about it, and maybe that's a general cultural thing that we're not supposed to talk about what money, but I think women adhere to it more often. And we kind of keep, whether it be our success in money or financial success, or even our missteps, we tend to keep those close to the vest, not talk about them, and that is kind of why I wanna do this series, is I think that a misconception out there is that women and money don't mesh, when in reality, we know that women are making money at levels that have never before been seen, and with that comes all of these, access points to the world around them, and and yet, because we're not talking about it, maybe people don't see it or realize it, right? New home ownership is really high, especially amongst single women more than single men. Like there's all these stats out there that show us there's good stuff, but most of the time we get the bad stats. So for this episode, I reached out to you to talk about a concept that's very important to me. And it's this concept of a nest and a net. And throughout my career, as I have coached women, even when they just are an employee reporting to me, for some reason, I'm real intrusive in their lives. And I start talking to them about money. And this concept of a nest and a net, where there are multiple ways to prepare or to organize your money so that it can be available to you in a number of different scenarios. And so that is sort of what I wanted to start the conversation with you about, is just how do we get right with our money, right? How do we set ourselves up regardless of our level of wealth for future success, for present success, and to feel more comfortable around our money?
I
You
love
on
that.
board? Okay.
Yes, yes. And I absolutely love that you are practicing and sharing the practice of talking about money. It's something I know that I personally struggled with in my life, and I've seen many women around me struggle with feeling okay talking about money. I think there's a lot of cultural guilt, shame, a sense of, you know, being greedy or just too much, or it's just like a dirty word in a way.
Mhm.
I think women in our culture, especially historically, have been in more of a care role where doing domestic duties, caring for children and family members, a lot of that work until recently, and even still now, with unpaid labor. Women doing that out of the role of motherhood and
Mm.
being a woman and just out of sense of duty. And so I think as we as a society are starting to transform into one in which women have access to wealth building opportunities, capital, having their own bank account. It's kind of a new world for us all to be navigating. And it's not like it's something that just happens overnight where we all of a sudden are money fluent. It takes practice and it takes exposure to other women talking about money. And I know personally, I have a couple of girlfriends who are very comfortable talking about money. And it's been so helpful for me just to be in an environment in which, they can talk about what they make or how much they charge. And it's just there's nothing, when they say those words, it just kind of rolls off the tongue like it's nothing. It's not a big deal.
Mhm.
And I think by doing that, it's taking away some of the power or weight, the negative feelings of talking about money. And the more that women can talk about money freely, the more that they can share that knowledge. And I think knowledge is power, especially with maybe negotiating in the workplace, asking for raises, talking about money at home if you're partnered. I'm talking about the balance of labor at home. Those conversations I think can be ones that women would benefit more if they're able to discuss money and do so freely and comfortably and with confidence.
Of course. So I want to start by asking you, because it is so rare for women to be in this industry of wealth management or financial planning, what was it that drew you to the work? Was it something you always dreamed of? Was it accidental? Like, how did you get to where you're at right now?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of both. It wasn't something I always dreamed of. I didn't even know what, wealth management or financial planning was when I got into it about 10 years ago. Um, but one of the things that has really been my driving force, I would say, over this time period is just seeing in my own life and in the lives of the women around me, what money can mean as far
Mm.
as optionality, more choices, freedom or lack thereof. One of the things that I've seen a lot of, and I want to do something about, is there's so many women who make a lot of decisions in their lives based on the ability or lack of ability um, to leave a situation due to financial circumstances. And what I want is to help women have more freedom to choose whatever it might be, whatever that choice is, and not have the limiting factor there be money,
Mhm.
so that a woman doesn't have to stay, in a domestic situation where the only reason she can't leave is lack of access to resources. I want to do what I can to help women to be empowered to learn how to build their nets and their net so that they can, make choices that align with what they truly want.
Sure. Awesome.
So
I love that concept too, because it's beyond your own wealth management. It's seeing what it can do for others around you. And I think that is a unique thing for women. I think women fall, whether they choose or they fall into a career, it is often based on something bigger than themselves. Why they do it or how they do it or how they find themselves in that situation. It's like it's not always or solely wealth focused, right? Does that make sense?
yeah, I can share a personal story there. So, my grandma Iris, she passed away a couple of years ago at 99, which is amazing that she lived to 99. She had a big family, 6 kids. Um, and at her celebration of life, they were telling a story about Iris and all the, amazing work that she did as a wife and a mother. And as it was being presented, I was sitting there and I was just like, wow, like that kind of sounds like it. Done. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, like her life and my life are so different. And I have all this access to knowledge, to resources. I have a job outside of the home. I get paid. I can have my own apartment, my own bank account. I don't have to be married. I don't have to have kids one after another. Like that's not even something that I had really been considering to that point. And that was actually the reason that I ended up going for my certified financial planner designation, which is a very difficult thing to do. I remember thinking like, wow, the women before me didn't have the opportunity to do this. And here I am being given all of these gifts and resources. Like, I need to do this,
Yeah.
because of everything that they've done to get me here.
We are our grandmother's wildest dreams,
Yeah.
right?
Beyond. Yeah.
Well, and I wanna clarify that that also is not a dig at the life that they led, excuse me, or the life that women that choose not to do those things and to live a more traditional life. It is exactly what you said. It's about the option to go in the direction that is going to, serve you and your purpose in the world, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And I know some people get all whatever woo woo about that, but ultimately that is what it is. And as we grow as a culture and a society and generationally, if you look at a parent's dreams for their children, again, I always repeat this, I do not have children, but I am smart enough to see and hear what happens around me. My parents have said it, my grandparents have said it, right? Every generation wants to provide and give access for their children to have a better life in whatever context that means for them than they. It's not a knock on their own life, it's just, "Hey, I think we can still do better. I think there's more options, there's more things," right? And so, as we take those lessons from our grandmothers and our mothers, we can use what they built for us to build something bigger that wasn't even in their imagination, and access to funding helps that.
Yes. 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 Big time. Um, I think, money is an interesting thing. One of the things that I love about my work is that it allows me to help people align their money or their resources with what's meaningful to them. And in that way, getting to live a life that's in alignment with, your calling, your path, or whatever it is that brings you the most joy or fulfillment in this life. And I think that's a very beautiful and almost like sacred thing to
Yeah.
help someone do that. And
Yeah.
I think money too is interesting in that I think it's like a proxy for your life energy for time. We work and we get paid, and you could, do the math, and you could, figure out what a dollar is worth as far as your time. And so it's something too that I think it's important to honor and to steward very carefully, because it's literally your life's work, your life energy that's been, transformed into something else. And so um how can you utilize it in a way that is um building a better future for yourself, but also for the people that come after you. And, to your point, the women that came before, I think that they made the absolute best that they could of their situation. I think anybody in life at any point gonna have a set of cards, right? And you can look at them and you can say, "Oh, this is a bad hand. What's the point of trying?" Or you can say, "Hey, this is the hand that I'm dealt. What's my best move?" And you look forward and you look for that next move, and you make the best of it that you can. And I think that that is, what we're trying to do here with women and money. There are still many, many disparities between men and women and money and access to money. But, we can only move forward based on the cards that we have in our hands today, right? So what can we do from here to improve the lives of women?
It's funny that you mention your grandmother because this concept of a nest and a net, while not directly from my grandmother, it does come from my grandmother and a grandfather on opposite sides of my family.
Ooh.
So my dad was adopted, and his adopted parents, I mean, they're lovely people. They are his parents. They provided, did everything for him. And my grandpa was this kind of, I don't know if stoic is the right word, but he was definitely that like 1950s guy, right? He wore Wranglers, white t-shirts, he smoked cigarettes, drank coffee, and watched John Wayne movies. And I would remember, like, if I would spend the night there, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and he'd just be sitting there watching one of those movies, and he would be counting change. And he kept Planters cashew he loved Planters cashews, and he would keep the jars, and they were all over his house, and they were full of change. And it was this thing in my brain that you should always have some money around the house. Like, in whatever form it was, it should be there in case of something. What happened? And like I might come over and him and my great grandmother, they might give me a silver dollar or like a 50-cent piece from those change jars. And it was just this special kind of thing. And then my mother's mother, Dorothy, or as we sometimes refer to her and she hates it, Dot, again, passed away a few years ago. But she was this proud, regal kind of woman, right? And she married my grandfather. It was her second marriage, and there was money there, right? And they lived a very posh life, at least from my perspective as a child. And the older I got, I noticed something. She did not work any longer. And quite frankly, he retired at 50. So neither one of them worked. They traveled a ton. But I would start to notice things she did. I don't know if this is exactly how it happened, but from what I understand, she had an allowance or she had money that was given to her to run the house and run whatever it was that they do. Much later in life, I learned how much of that allowance she socked away and these tricks that she had for living a quote unquote bougie life on a very non-bougie budget, right? And I think my grandfather didn't even know those things that she did, right? She was a heck of a deal maker and she knew where to find things that were high end, but not high end prices. She labeled everything like I mean, maybe 30 years before she passed, she would put our names on the back of things so that we could get them when she passed, which is very generational, I think. But she had this way of stocking and storing money around. And so I grew up with this understanding that not of investing, but of saving. And it wasn't until my 20s where this concept of investing came into play. But by then, my history was so about saving and almost a fear of being without that I was not and still am not an aggressive or a risk-taking investor. That was a very long way to lead to a question for you, but I feel like it sets a little bit of a stage of why my view of investing isn't about growth necessarily, it's about protection. Nests, right? So, do you find that with a lot of women that they are less or they're more risk averse, that they look at money maybe more as a protection asset than a a growth asset?
Yeah, yeah, exactly to your point, actually. The most common question that I get or fear that I get when I'm sitting across from a woman is, am I going to be okay?
Mm,
They're not looking, to have outside returns. They're not looking for, crazy performance. They're not looking, at every single holding in their portfolio and wondering why isn't this higher. And what they really want to know is that over the long term, is this going to take care of me and my needs? Is this going to make sure that I can maintain my standard of living? Is this going to make sure that I'm not dependent or a burden on my children or grandchildren down the road? And it's much more, I think, from a protection and safety mindset. And it's interesting. There's been some studies about men and women and how they approach investing. Men, I think, culturally, biologically, I don't know, maybe a combo of both. Men are much more likely to take on risk, take on outsized risk, um, and women are not. So, interestingly enough, women are less likely to invest in the first place,
mhm,
but if they have access to knowledge around investing, or if they work with a financial planner, or if they see it in their personal life, if you can get a woman to start investing, women are actually better long-term investors than men because a woman from that risk perspective is much more likely to have a diversified
yeah,
portfolio with many different asset classes within it, which is going to help. You're not going to ever have one thing in the portfolio that's going to either make you a killing or get killed by it, right? You're putting your eggs, you're having those little, planters boxes all over the house.
Yeah.
There's many different avenues um, for kind of safer
Do you think
safer growth.
do you think part of that is because men approach it almost like a game? Like a win and loss as where women are like, "No, I can't have any loss. I
You know,
I need the middle."
I think that could be part of it. I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, and they were asking this question of why more venture capital people are men. It's like 90% male, 95% male, and they were talking about men and risk. And one of the thoughts that they had about why this could be is that men can afford to take risk.
Mm,
Um, Men have easier access to capital. They have higher paying jobs. Generally, women still only make about 83 cents for every dollar that a man makes, and that's a white woman.
yep,
Um, it, and so for a woman, every dollar that she has, see, it was harder earned for her. She had to spend more time. She had to give up more to get that. And she probably has less of them overall. So
yeah,
that means that the utility of each of her dollars is higher. And
yeah,
so, from the fear of lack, or maybe almost the wisdom of, you know, of having a more modern portfolio, is that she's not as concerned with those short term, let's make a lot of money really fast. She's much more long term oriented. And I think women in general, actually, because of, motherhood, the way that women have organized societies, food, all of the things that all through history women have been responsible for. There's so many pieces. Women have had to be very, very future focused, thinking
yeah.
about the safety of themselves and their offspring. And I think that that way of thinking very much comes into play with investing today.
I wonder too if again, I'm positing a question that neither one of us should know the answer to off the top of our head, but anthropologically speaking, there's a lot that happens with men that activates adrenaline. That creates this rush, right? From the earliest days of cavemen and going out and hunting and all of those things. And as we get into a modern society that's a little bit more cushy, right? If you will, uh, that adrenaline or that seeking adventure comes in different ways, right? And then also there's a there's a thing I think it is changing, but there's also with women, you are responsible for more than just yourself. And with men, let's say something goes wrong, there's somebody there to take care of it, oftentimes, right? And then in modern society, we know that women live so much longer than men, and we are single much a much larger portion of our life than men. And so this ability to be able to take care of ourselves and those around us, right? Generations are living longer. So, when we talk about 80% of all purchases being influenced by women, some people scoff at that, but the reality is I I'm gonna say me, even though I'm not married and don't have children, but I'm taking care of me, my children, my aging parents, maybe other members of the family, and men don't often have all of those same responsibilities or that same pull to that responsibility, right? So there might be some anthropological kind of elements of that ride with what our natures are as well.
I totally agree. Totally agree. What you're talking about there too is the unpaid labor of women,
Yeah.
both in the home, but in the community. And that's been one of the big things that, it's slowly changing, but it's still, women still do to this day in 2025, 2/3 of all unpaid labor in the home. So that's taking care of children, taking care of aging parents. If you partnered and it could be her partner's parents.
Mhm.
Um, Women are much more likely to take time, if they have a job or career path, take time off of that to be at home and taking care of family members. And all of those things together really put women at a disadvantage economically. Um, and I do think that there's something, but just with men and women in general, where I think there is that adrenaline, that excitement, that risk-taking behavior,
Mhm.
which, maybe back in the days when men were having to hunt, the big game, that was probably very helpful that they were willing to, in theory, take on a lot more risk to go after the the woolly mammoth, right? Like it's very high risk, low probability that you get one. But if you do get one, right, you're going to be feeding the whole group for a long time, right? So it's high risk, high reward
Mm,
versus lower risk, lower reward in the short term, but much more consistent over the long term.
yeah, yeah. So if we take all of this information, by the way, I'm having such a good time. I love this kind of conversation. I think it's so interesting. Um, if we take all of this information and we kind of root it in this concept of a nest and a net, um, I have my ideas of what that is, but I don't work in finances. I just work with my own finances, right? So I'd be curious. So when we originally talked, I brought this concept to you. Before you did some digging, when I said that, what did you think a nest and a net was? Or like what the differences were or even the concept?
Yeah. So immediately when you said nest, I thought of like nest egg or a, you know, some kind of a platform on which you're going to, build your life from.
Yeah.
I wasn't 100% sure about net, if you meant safety net, which you did,
Yeah.
and how that would look a little bit different. But my understanding really is, you know, we could put all of a person's money together in one pot and look at it in that way and make plans from that. Or it might be a little bit easier to kind of do what we call like mental accounting, where you have buckets, right? And this is for this purpose here, this is for this purpose here. And it kind of is like budgeting almost on a
Yeah.
large scale.
Yeah.
And so my understanding of your nest and net idea is that the nest is how are you going to do intentional long-term planning for your long-term goals? So that could be retirement, that could be buying a house down the line, or saving up for your kid's college, right? You're doing this for planned expenses, dreams down the line versus the net being that safety net for unexpected emergencies. Like when things come up, it could be divorce, it could be job loss, it could be health issues. These things that kind of come out of nowhere. What do you have earmarked? What resources do you have? And it might not just be money, right? But what do you have earmarked um, for those unexpected expenses?
Yeah. And that is exactly it. I am a single woman of a certain age, and I've always been single. And one of the things I'm going to say since I was 25, I've actually never really thought about getting married. Before 25, it was like, yes, I gotta get married. I gotta have children. Like, that's the path. And at 25, I even considered and looked into adoption by myself because I was like, I am so late to the game. What the heck am I doing? At around 27 is when I feel like my career started. Before then, I was just working. And there was something about a shift to a career that made me realize all the reasons I thought I needed to get married and have children might not be a good reason to do it. And a lot of it had to do with security and stability. Without going into a lot of detail, I did not grow up with a lot of, and so looking back now, right, I can see that I have been on a constant search for stability. And that definition has changed over time of what stability looks like because, you know what you know until you know more, right? And so then you kind of advance the cause. And so, today stability looks very different than what it did when I was 27 and I started on this journey. But it's still deeply rooted within me that I am my only I'm my hero. Ugh, gosh, that was so
I love that. I love that.
oh, I hate it, but thank you. But it's like there's no one that's gonna come to save the day. There's no one that's going like those trust falls you used to do in corporate America, right? Nobody is catching me. Now, that does not mean I do not have good family, good friends, a good support system. But the only reason I ever even thought about marriage after the age of 25 was, gosh, it seems like if I was married, then I could stop and take a breath and reevaluate what I'm doing and what I wanna do, and I would look at people who are married and say, "Ugh, look at that freedom that they have." And it was a skewed view of what freedom was, and I have seen that as I have grown, because now I have a lot of, people in my life who, through divorce or through a number of other things, are single, and they're embracing that life. We're seeing this so much on social media and in the cultural zeitgeist, right? Is that women are like, "Oh, wait a minute. If you can't bring this, I'm good. Like, I'm having a great time," right? And there's this freedom in that. And so again, those definitions change as you go. But I really this nest in the net thing was because, you know, I I was on my own very early, and the tiniest thing would send me into turmoil. A flat tire. "Ah, how do I can't do that. I'm making $4.25 an hour. Like, how where am I gonna find the money to fix a tire?" And the emotional toll that that took on me, once I had a career, I said, "That will never happen to me again. I'm going to be prepared for these little hiccups in the road that I can't predict." And that's where I don't even know if I was looking at the future, I was looking at that. How do I avoid speed bumps so that I can maintain this, like, homeostasis of my mind, body, and spirit, where money wasn't the thing that prevented me from enjoying life? And it was so formulaic that there was a point in my career, I wanna say I was 28 or 29. And it was the first time I had a roommate, right? But it was the first time in my life where if I wanted to go out to dinner, I didn't have to figure it out. Like, I could go to I was gonna say a store name that I'm currently boycotting, so I decided to avoid saying that. I could go to the drugstore and buy, like, makeup and nail polish and not freak out about it, right? So, until, like, 2 years ago, I still used the spreadsheet from that moment in my life as the basis for financial safety. And so I would take the more money I made, but I would put it into a formula that was based on the freedom I had there. So it was like, okay, if I can live that life, everything else goes into some form of a savings account so that I can still live that free life, buy my nail polish. But I'm going to start planning for something as well. I didn't know what to plan for. And for me, it was always a disaster. I never prepared for anything that wasn't a disaster or calamity. That was just where my brain took me. And so the nest and the net was avoiding calamity at all costs so that, I've lived in my car before. I won't have to live in my car again. Won't have to take showers at the 24-hour fitness, right? It really was about safety. Um, Even though there was future looking, right? There's insurance policies, there's all that. Um, I don't know if I've ever really said that out loud in a public forum, but that really was what the basis of was for me.
Yeah. And, I think that makes a lot of sense. But you built your net first, which
Yes.
makes sense, right? Because if you can't survive the next, what's immediately in front of you, the next day, the next week, the next year, then there's no point in looking further
Yeah.
past that, right? You must first
Yeah.
get to past what's happening in the here and now. And so I think that was a very wise approach for you. I do sometimes see people who get maybe a little bit confused with what they need to do first, and they'll
Yeah.
be saving for the way off future because that's what they hear about, save for your retirement. But then they're living paycheck to paycheck or maybe even, debt in the here and now. And in a case like that, we would probably want to look at priorities and maybe
Yeah.
moving their nest building instead of prioritizing that, prioritizing their net building so that
Yeah.
they can, even get to that point where they even have the opportunity to be in retirement.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's, your survival mechanisms kicking in, right? And I think
Yeah.
this is why women, if and when they do start to invest, they're very good long-term investors because I think that they're thinking through often a lot of the calamities, right? Like worst case scenarios. I think, um, I was reading a study weeks ago that was talking about women and just anxiety. And one of the things it was saying was that because women have had to be so aware of so many things going on, aware of the people in their household, the children, making sure that they're not, about to run into the road. Women, when you're in a parking garage at night, just being aware of your surroundings, that's been a survival mechanism, right? But it's also very energy intensive, right? And it can be exhausting. And at some point, you might just want to be able to put that down and take a breath.
Yes.
And to your point, people who have partner, they have the ability, if it's a good situation, to potentially, put it down and take a breath while their partner kind of carries the team for a little while.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then you're kind of running a marathon without any breaks, and it is harder.
Yeah. It's interesting too because the the listener, I was gonna say the universe, but the universe doesn't know this, just whoever listens. They know that I've been out of work for quite a long time. And yet I've had people that are like, "Well, how are you doing all of this?" Because I'm living life to the best of my ability through this, right? I'm going to the beach and I'm going to concerts and I'm going out and I'm exploring nature. I do day trips where I just drive to little tiny towns and check them out. And the net helped me do that. Now, I'm now at this point where it's like, okay, DEFCON, whatever is the bad one, right? I've got to dig into that nest because the net is gone, right? And so you make adjustments and you do what you have to do. But the net allowed me also you had said something that made me think this is, we do look for the calamity and the disaster, and you're just trying to survive now. And then I think what that does is it pulls us away from enjoying the present, excuse me. And so one of the things that became really important to me during this time of unemployment was, look, not many people get 2 years off. Now, granted, it's not paid, but how do I not sit in the stress, the anxiety, and the misery that comes with that? And by the way, that stress, that anxiety, and that misery, it has its moments, let me tell you. But how do I also make sure that if I never get this free time again, I've done something that has fed me during that? And that, not to get too esoteric, that is another portion of wealth planning, right? And sustainability. And I think it's important to mention that because this can all be stressful, right? And we're in this really stressful time, but we have to remember and continually seek out moments or uh I'm just going to say moments of joy in the anxiety, right? And I think the nest and the net gives you some freedom to maybe do that sometime. And I have a lot of friends and associates who are now in the process of layoffs over the last few months because it's happening so much. And of course, I'm their first call. I'm an expert at this, right? At this point. And the first thing I say is take a freaking deep breath. Spend this next 2 or 3 days to wallow, to grieve. Then on Monday, get your I'm gonna curse. Is that okay? Uh, get your shit straight. Where's your money? What do you have? How long do you have? What do you need? Is it unemployment you need to get? Is it things you need to move around? Is it reaching out to contacts? Like, spend that. Don't miss the grief and the rage that first. Then go into the assessing, understanding your true situation. Then we go into planning and action mode. And I think women tend to get immediately into problem solving. And sometimes that can mean that the anxiety stays a little longer because we haven't actually dealt with it's all grief, right? Like any bad thing that happens to you, there is a component of grief in it. And financial instability probably has such a large component of grief because it's representative of everything in our life, right? So if you could, and obviously every situation is different, but if you were to advise listeners on whether you use the nest and net terminology or not, right? I don't care. But if you were to say, if the listeners are women and they're sitting there and saying, okay, I want to get financially right for me, what would you suggest for them?
Yeah. One of the first things that we talk through with clients is, essentially the net, right? What do you have, if anything, set aside for if you were to lose your job, or get divorced? If you were in a situation where you no longer had money coming in, what is going to sustain you over the next, 3, 6, 12 months? And so, if it's a single woman, we would probably recommend, make sure that you have, living expenses, your basic living expenses covered 6 months to 12 months, and have that set aside in maybe a high yield savings account, but someplace that you can access it quickly if you need to.
Can I
Because,
stop you right there and
yeah,
ask a
yeah,
question? Uh, when I first started doing this is like 15 years ago. Susie Orman was the only woman talking about money, right? And it was 6 months. With where we are now in society, is 6 months enough?
that's a really good question. I don't know if, if where we are today in society, 6 months is enough. It's going to give you a little bit of runway to at least take
Sure.
that pause, that breath. It's interesting, kind of the advice that we would give to a single person versus somebody who, let's say, is coupled. Let's say that you're in a household where there's two incomes. There we might say, okay, maybe you only need to have it like a minimum of 3 months, right? Because if one of you were to lose your job, you still have the stability, ideally, of that other income, and you don't need to have as much of a buffer. And so it comes down to, having a starting point of 6 months, but then what's your personal comfort level, right? Um, that could be more than enough for somebody to feel at ease, to feel peace, to be able to make clear-minded decisions should an unexpected event come up. For others, it might not be enough, and they might feel really panicky about having, what feels like a really thin buffer for them. And so for someone like that, it would be better for them to have more because it's not out at the end of the day, it's not about growing your money the most. It's about, how can your money help you live a life that is, to your point, the most joyous or meaningful or to bring you peace, right? How can we help you to align your money with a life that for you?
Mm.
Yeah. And so I think, everyone's situation is different. And I would say it's best if you can, work with a financial planner, a financial professional to sit down and look at your unique situation. Look at, what is your income? What are your expenses? What would it potentially look like if the income stopped? What would it look like if you didn't have anything coming in for the next year? What would that cost you to maintain your lifestyle, or at least to, not lose your housing situation? What would it cost you to make sure that you have your food and your utilities and gas, all of that covered? And get an idea of what does your net need to look like to provide you with that safety, that moment of pause, that peace of mind should something happen. And, you know, life in general, we can pretty much guarantee that something will happen at some point, right? We don't
Yeah.
know what it will be. We don't know how big it will be, but you can kind of just assume that something will happen and you're going to be much better off if you have done this net building at a time.
Do you find yourself having to, this is so stereotyped what I'm gonna ask, but tell women to put their own oxygen mask on first when they financial plan?
Yes, and I would say we see that a lot, with women who have families, even like grown adult children, where, their child may be in their 40s or 50s, and yet may still come to mom on a regular basis, for help with their, monthly expenses. And, there may be certain situations where that's just a scenario and whether or not, the child really needs that or not. But I've seen many scenarios in which um it's a matter of there's kind of like a guilt on the mother or the woman that, oh, I need to help my family, and she'll do it even when those resources really should be prioritized to her own survival, really. Like where maybe her retirement plan only works if she's fully utilizing her resources for her own needs. And it's hard to see, um, it's hard to see when, they're helping someone else put on their mask first
Yeah.
before putting their own on. Because at the end of the day, if you can't take care of yourself, um, you can't take care of others, but also you will likely be a burden on others as well at some point down the road. And so I think that that actually can be an example of shorter term thinking potentially,
Yeah.
where they're just thinking about there's an emergency right now. My child needs this. I'm going to, if I need to kind of raid my retirement account to make sure that they, have a car, I'll do that. And then not really realizing the longer term consequences of that. And I think that's where financial planning can really be helpful because it allows us to map or model out what a financial decision looks like today and how that impacts, in theory, your plan over, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So as we close out of this particular episode, and I'm so excited you're coming back for another one. Um, the question that I would ask is if you could say to women, if there's one thing you wish women knew about wealth management and financial planning, what is it?
It would be that it's it's easier than you think. I think a lot of the language and terminology in this industry is purposely opaque and it's meant I think to make it more confusing than it needs to be. And I truly, truly, truly believe that um, as long as I can communicate in a way that is receivable by the person sitting next to me, that they can actually make the decision for what they need to do next. It becomes very clear, and it's their own life. They know their own priorities, and it will allow them to take agency in taking the next step towards saving and investing. But I think my role really there is to be the translator to make sure that they understand what we're talking about. But from there, really, they are able to be that person who takes, sovereignty over their own resources and makes those decisions. And I think a lot of the reason why women maybe are slow to invest or don't invest at all is this feeling of it's so overwhelming. There's no way I could possibly understand it. I think a lot of our societal programming or messaging is really, oh, that's not for what, let the men handle that. That's not really something that you need to worry about. And I think I can actually see that a lot with when we have clients who are, recently divorced or their spouse has recently passed away. And this might be the first time in their life that they're having to, manage the money. And there can often be, feelings of discomfort or not confident or feeling not capable. And none of those things are true. But that's the belief that's been instilled in them through many different ways over their lifetime. And so I would say find somebody who can help you learn. It's very learnable, and women are actually, great investors and planners. And I think for a lot of reasons, like we talked about, with the ways that women are thinking about themselves and others in the future, I would just say um, don't let any of those societal messages discourage you from just taking one next step because you can definitely do it and you can be successful. You can create a life where you have that peace, have that joy, have that security, and it's going to be well worth it in the long run.
I love it. I love it so much. I can't even handle it. Gina, I really appreciate you being here for this episode and for being willing to do 2 episodes with us. So people will be excited to have you back. Vision Capital Management is the organization that you work with. It's out of Portland, Oregon. What is the website for Vision Capital?
Yes, it's vcmi.net.
Okay, awesome. And we'll put it on our blog page
Perfect.
and give resources for people on how to contact you or Vision Capital in general. And everyone, I hope you stick around for the rest of this series. We're very excited to talk about women and money and dispel myths and put it out there and be excited for everybody. So until next time, we will see you soon.